Good morning. This is Jackie Downing from the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. I'm here with my colleague, Valerie Knight-DeGangi from the Valley Community Foundation. And we're here for the last in our 5-part series with Danosky Associates. Sharon Danosky has been leading this series for us, and it has just been timely and perfect. As we see from the numbers of registration, we have more than 60 people joining us this morning, and that has been consistent throughout these recordings, so we hope that you found them helpful. This will be recorded. It will be posted on both the Community Foundation's sites early next week, and the slides will also be available if you'd like to share them. We are so grateful to Danosky Associates and Sharon Danosky, Juanita, and Susan and her team for putting this together. It is just, I think, what our community needs at this point. We hope that you have enjoyed the series. We hope you've benefited from it. Please let us know if there are other ways that we can help. We'd love to hear from you about other things that you're looking for in training and in connection. That's how Valerie and I plan our schedules, so we're hoping that we'll hear from you. There's a lot to talk about in financial planning in uncertain times, and that's certainly where we are. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharon now.
Thank you, Jackie. And, you know, Susan and I want to thank you and the community, the Valley Community Foundation and the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. You've been absolutely extraordinary partners, and we are so grateful to you for all you do. I'd like to introduce you to Susan Rosati. Susan Rosati has a master's in finance. She's worked with numerous nonprofits. She's worked both in the business sector and in the nonprofit sector, and she has great experience. And what I love about Sue is she's just got a ton of common sense and asks really good questions. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And thank you, Jackie and Valerie and the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and the Valley Community Foundation for this opportunity. As Sharon mentioned, I've been working for over 30 years in the for-profit and not-for-profit sector. And for the last 10 years with Danosky Associates, helping nonprofits with their financial needs. So at this point, we're going to jump in. So, about today's seminar, we have a few housekeeping rules. Everyone's devices are muted to diminish background noise. You will find a bar where you can ask a question or respond to a poll. And there are several polls we will be asking you. So look for them as we go. We will also be asking you a few questions during the session. So answer them using the Q&A box on the bar. We will be recording this and we'll be making it available through the foundation. Also, at the end of this presentation, we'll take about 10 minutes to answer any questions. And if we don't get to your question or are unable to answer your question today, please email us at info@danosky.com and we will get back to you. So let's get started. All right, our first poll. So how many Zoom conference calls or webinars have you been on so far this week? Hopefully you haven't been too overloaded with them. So just take a minute to click on one of those boxes and we'll see what these results are. All right. Okay, 61%, 1 to 5. All right, 6% none, 33% 6 to 10. Some people have been very busy this week. All right, and then the next one's, what's your favorite non-work Zoom activity? So any of you out there going to some Zoom parties? Very interested to see what you have to say here. You can put the results in the Q&A box. So hopefully you're doing something fun. Let's see. Oh, reading, knitting, lots of reading. All right, fitness classes, lessons, gardening. All right, lessons, very good. Walking, great. Everyone's doing a lot of walking out here. All right. Very good. So now we're going to dig a little deeper because we'd like to know who's on the call today. So how many of you are on the front lines of providing some type of human service support during this crisis, whether it's food, transportation, health, childcare, animal shelters, anything that might challenge your resources? And how many of you are organizations that are not providing direct services, but are helping people cope, such as library, cultural organizations, museums, historical organizations, anything else there? So just go ahead and answer that poll, and then we'll check those results. All right, so 53% of you are on the front lines. All right, 47% providing comfort and moral support. Okay, all right, so now we know what our crowd is. And the second question is, how many of you hold financial positions? How many are executive directors or any board members out there or other? And we'll just click on one of these and see what the results are. Okay, so there's 22% in financial position, 39% executive directors, 26% board members, and 13% others. Okay, so quite a few executive directors out there. All right, I just want to start off by saying how important it is to take care of yourself during this time. With all the added stress of COVID-19, and it makes dealing with finances just that much more difficult. So here are some things that we recommend. That you eat well, get some exercise, talk to family and friends, call them, use Skype or Zoom, or stand 6 feet away with a face mask on. Definitely take some breaks. Use healthy coping mechanisms that you've developed over the years, or find new ones. And get your information from reliable sources, because there's so many news sources out there right now. Definitely want to stay calm, and don't let your nonprofit's financials really get the best of you. So where do you begin in all of this? Before you begin doing really any type of scenario planning, you really need to understand where your organization is right now regarding their finances. So you wouldn't take a road trip without checking the gas tank first, and scenario planning is a journey. So you want to look at your liquid unrestricted assets, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, along with your revenue and expenses on the statement of activities, your burn rate or your months of Luna, which is your average of how many months of cash you have left, and your cash flow. So many of you might not have a lot of clarity on your cash flow, what that looks like right now, but we'll talk about that. All right, your liquid unrestricted net assets. Basically, these are the assets we can use now to get us through this crisis. So Luna is the portion of unrestricted net assets that can be converted to cash relatively easily. This may or may not include board designated funds, and it's based on accessibility. So unrestricted net assets, also known as the operating reserve, represent the cumulative earnings over the life of the organization. So a positive operating reserve allows the organization to pay its current obligations and fund future programs or projects through the use of these unrestricted net assets. So many organizations receive, these unrestricted revenues through fee for service, ticket sales, or membership income. Other sources of revenue could include unrestricted grants and contributions, but whatever the source, they contribute to the overall financial health of the nonprofit as part of its unrestricted net assets. So when you're looking at your statement of financial position, your assets might appear healthy, but some of those funds may be off limits. So we want to look at what's available to us now, what we can use to pay our expenses in the present. So this is how you go about calculating Luna. It's your total net assets minus your restricted net assets minus your property, land, and equipment. You're going to add your debt secured by property or equipment and subtract out any other long-term assets. But you also want to look at your months of Luna, which would be your Luna divided by your average monthly expenses. So there really isn't a hard, fast rule on how many months you should have, and it's going to vary. But at least 3 months would be generally recommended. So this information is going to provide you with a good starting point in understanding your financial health. First of all, you want to prioritize your programs. So what is essential to fulfill your mission? You always want to stay true to your mission and not let go of your core programs that are most important. And remember first most why you are here and who you are serving. So what are services that can be put on hold? So you might have a program that isn't as essential as your core programs that can be brought back at a later time. You might need to shelve a plan to expand into areas where you don't currently have expertise or experience. And what services could be delivered differently? So we're seeing organizations getting pretty creative at how they're delivering their program. So for example, an in-person counseling service might now shift to an online counseling service using Zoom. And what programs could be referred to another organization whose primary mission it is? So ordinarily, you wouldn't think of moving out programs or services to another nonprofit, but you should think about this step if needed. All right, so cash flow, very important. If you weren't managing your cash flow closely before, you need to start doing it now. Now, I know some organizations that are only looking at their P&L and balance sheet each month and really haven't paid too much attention to it. But cash management has never been more critical. You want to look at your weekly, your monthly, your quarterly cash flow projections, possibly 1 year out. So start with what you know. You'll then want to estimate your revenue and expenses for the year, and don't forget about your extraordinary expenses. I like to see it mapped out over months to show you where those shortfalls might start happening. So this is an example of a cash flow statement done in Excel. And it starts with the beginning cash balance, and then you'll enter your revenue that you're expecting to receive. You want those entries to be actual projections of what you're going to receive and what you'll be spending. So stick to what you know is certain. You don't simply divide your expected expenses and revenue by 12 and plot it out. You actually have to go into each month and plan it out there. So then you'll form strategies to fill the funding gaps or cut costs. So having a negative bottom line means you have a shortage of cash. So identifying the shortfalls early allows you to have control over the situation before it becomes crippling to the organization. So you need to see both the short and the long-term views on this. Okay, so in this case, you'll have your beginning balance, and then you'll list them all out. But if you're doing this, you might want to just build out, your cash disbursements. You could list them all here, and then this will carry forward. It'll have a rolling balance, and that'll go forward to the next month. All right, so some nonprofits, might need to look at their cash flow a lot closer than once a month. So in this case, you'll want to map out your cash flow maybe by week 1, week 2, etc., and take it out so many months. And you must remember that when setting up these cash flow statements, that profit and loss is not cash. Okay, so the timing of cash is very important. So in this example, you'll see programs for each month, but maybe a grant will come through, will come through maybe a few times a year. And because you're a nonprofit, hopefully you'll have several different revenue streams here. Regarding your expenses, you might have payroll every other week. You may pay the rent once a month at the beginning of the month. So you'll put it correspond that to the week. So you also want to enter your credit card payments you need to make. So you're not going to be listing the actual expenses on the credit card, but instead the amount that you plan to pay on that credit card. So you might also need to make a loan payment, and all of these are going to impact cash. So once at the end of the first week, you'll have a cash flow statement. You'll go back and you'll put those actuals in, and that will carry forward to the next week. So when you start to see weeks where cash is getting depleted, you'll be able to make those scenario decisions for your organization. So again, you can build these out. If this time, again, if you feel like you need to keep a closer eye on this, because you're afraid you're not going to make payroll, definitely map it out by weeks. And then when you start seeing those shortfalls, when cash starts getting low, you can start making some adjustments. All right, revenue. I've listed out several revenue streams that a nonprofit might have. You have government funding, grants, service fee-based income, donations, corporate and individual, event income, endowment, in-kind, and other. So an in-kind gift would be something the organization has budgeted for and is used in fulfilling their mission. For example, a nonprofit on the front line might receive personal protection equipment, or a food bank might receive food, but it's not like a random gift to them. So as nonprofits, you'll have a mix of these different types of revenues. And you're going to want to evaluate your revenue. You want to look at each revenue stream and ask questions. So ask yourself if the funding will be guaranteed or if it will rebound in a few months. So some funding might be lost for the rest of the year. Many of you had to cancel events this year that might have been a big fundraiser for you. And maybe you could follow up with some of those donors or sponsors and ask them if they would consider giving at the same level. It's also important to understand how dependent you are on each of these revenue streams. Is it diversified? You want to have thoughtful discussions around all of this information. All right, financing. This is a real hot topic right now. I'm going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. So Congress just added another $310 billion to the PPP. So the PPP authorized billions in forgivable loans to small businesses, including nonprofits, to pay their employees during the COVID-19 crisis. So all loan terms are the same for everyone. I'm not going to go into the specifics of the PPP, but we'll list a reference link at the end of this presentation. Now, many of you have applied for the PPP, and some have received funding, and some of you that didn't get it on the first round, may get it this round. Or not. I was told that if you applied and you didn't get in on the first round, that you didn't need to go back through the system and apply again. So there's still a lot of uncertainty on the PPP on how quickly the second round's going to run out. However, if you did receive it and the funds are in your bank, you certainly can use this information to feed your cash flow analysis and scenario planning. But also pay strict attention to the loan forgiveness instructions. There are certain requirements that you must follow to move it from a loan to a grant. And if you don't follow this, you're going to end up having to pay it back. There's also the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. And these are low interest loans with 2.75% interest rates for nonprofits. Now, last time I looked, the new applications were not being taken at this time. So, however, that could change, and we'll again provide a link at the end of this presentation if you want more info. And there's also other local supports. We're seeing different types of supports from the foundations to help through COVID-19. So the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and the Valley Community Foundation have both offered grants relating to COVID-19. And also, if you didn't get the PPP, if you didn't receive that funding, you could also look into, opening a line of credit, setting up a loan with your local bank. You want to establish that relationship with your bank. But again, remember, this is a loan and it needs to be repaid. So where is your organization right now? Some nonprofits are on the front lines. These are nonprofits that are in high demand right now, where their services might be critical to their community. For example, nonprofits who are working with patients with COVID-19 are being drained on, or others that are providing food, shelter, and emotional care due to the aftermath of stay-at-home orders. Where you might be in the experimental stage. These nonprofits might be looking at new ways of delivering services. For example, we're seeing early childhood resource center transitioning to like Zoom meetings. And some nonprofits are actually steady. These nonprofits feel they can get through this without major restructuring. For example, land trusts are actually seeing more people use their trails. They're using this opportunity to show the public what is available to them and encouraging them to use the trails as like a safe space for social distancing. And some are in hibernation. These organizations are in a period of low activity. They're looking at what can still be maintained during this time. They also might be looking at doing projects that they had on the back burner. For example, maybe a theater group might be hibernating, but maybe they're streaming online some work just to keep them active. And some nonprofits will be redirecting. They may offer programs that they cannot fulfill right now. So you're working with other organizations, maybe at least in the short term, to help with those programs. And unfortunately, some nonprofits might not have the reserves or financing to carry them through, so closing their doors might be their only option. So if you don't really know where you're at right now, that will become clearer. So why scenario planning? The Voice of Charities did a survey and found that 96.5% of the 550 nonprofits worldwide they interviewed had a negative impact due to COVID-19. But this really is no surprise. However, with that said, nonprofits should look deeper into how they're going to proceed, and this is a tool for them to use. First of all, what are scenarios anyway? So scenarios are stories about how the future might unfold within your nonprofit. These are stories about diverse ways issues outside your organization might evolve. So whether it's COVID-19, the political environment, social attitudes, regulations, or the economy. And something to remember is that scenarios are not predictions, but they're rather a hypothesis. So scenarios are meant to stretch your thinking about opportunities and threats that the future might hold, and to weigh those opportunities and threats carefully when you're making both short-term and long-term decisions. So with that said, it allows your organization to prepare for the downturns and the opportunities, which then allow you to respond quickly. So your organization size does not matter at all. Both large and small nonprofits can have success with scenario planning. But there's also times that you might not want to use it. If you have faulty, misleading, or sloppy data, this would be a bad idea to work with this information. And also understand there's no perfect scenario. You don't want to spin your wheels here. I would say pick 3 or 4. If your organization starts going off in too many different paths, this will end up being a waste of time. And understand this is not a perfect science. And lastly, the wait and see scenario really is not a good scenario to use. I would not use that one. All right, so we have another poll, 2 polls. So how many of you are currently doing scenario planning? So you just click on one of those and we'll see the results, which are, okay, 86% are already doing scenario planning and 14 are not doing scenario planning. Okay, so you guys are pros already. So how many of you want to do scenario planning? Okay. Of that percentage that isn't. And we'll look at that. Oh, 100% of you want to do that. Okay, wonderful. I'm glad to see that. Very nice. So one of the resources that I turn to over the years is What If? The Art of Scenario Thinking for Nonprofits by Global Business Network. So this was put out years ago, but it still makes a lot of sense today. And I just want to summarize a few key takeaways that I found useful. And the first is setting strategic direction. If you're to prioritize the allocation of your limited funds in the short term, you must learn to prepare for the long term as well. So scenario thinking can help you make smart decisions in the short term while planning for the future. Catalyzing bold actions. So sometimes your funding assumptions are based on assumptions that have not been re-examined despite rapidly changing circumstances. So you want to change those assumptions. Scenario thinking, can be used to get your nonprofit out of the status quo. You want to look at diverse future possibilities that are both desirable and dark scenarios that create a sense of urgency. So accelerating collaborative learning. When you introduce new perspectives and new knowledge, this can lead your group to discover unimagined solutions. So you want to engage members by learning from each other. So scenarios can serve as a powerful platform to collaborate and explore a topic of common interest by organizing what is known and surfacing what is unknown and uncontrollable. It's designed to expand and challenge the group's thinking of a shared interest. And then there's your alignment and vision. So scenario thinking can help you build relationships. It creates a space for multiple perspectives to be heard, build alignment, and facilitate the development of a shared vision for the future, not necessarily mutually exclusive. So this is really a great exercise to do with the board. You could have your executive director, your management team, and the board work on this. As much as I would love to say the more the merrier, you also have to, you need to make this manageable. But if any of you are interested in that publication, let us know at info@danosky.com, and we'll certainly send it out to you. So scenario planning. When you start with your financial scenario plan, you want to create a best case, a moderate, and a worst case scenario. You're not limited to 3, but you don't want to have like endless scenarios. Otherwise, you're just going to get kind of lost in the minutia. And we had this question come up before, and that is it okay for the executive director to present some ideas to the board? The answer is no. That's kind of like the exact opposite of what we want you to do here. So scenario planning doesn't necessarily need to have maybe the full board involvement from the beginning, but you can set up maybe a task force and work with a few of the board members and management, and this will allow you to cultivate ideas and have input from different mindsets. All right, scenario planning in action. I think this flowchart is great at showing how scenario planning is done. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I wanted to show you, how your nonprofit would work through the process of scenario planning. You want to start with prioritizing your objectives. You want to brainstorm different ideas. You want to create scenario framework. You then would communicate and generate discussion of the implications. And then you're going to generate strategic options. Then you're going to embed those systems and then build responsiveness to change. Now, this is a good framework to follow, definitely for people that want to use it. All right, so what are the drivers? When you're thinking about your scenario, you'll need to understand those drivers. And those drivers can be both internal or external. Right now, we're dealing with an external driver. Ugh. So look at possible outcomes and assign estimates into how likely something might happen. So understand the risk of taking a certain path. How will this affect your organization? So look at the pros and cons and identify the best path for your nonprofit, which can be very difficult to do. But understand what programs should be protected and prioritized, and what programs should be postponed, reduced, or eliminated. And especially look at this while you begin to reopen your organization. So this is a revenue analysis worksheet. So this is an example where you would, put in your funding source, then list the likelihood of receiving that funding. Now this worksheet would then calculate the amount based on the percentages entered in for a best case, a moderate case, or a worst case assumption. So you would include the expense budget for each program here. So this worksheet can give you an idea how maybe to build out your own revenue analysis worksheet. You could then use this information for scenario planning. So just looking at look at these grants. If you have one grant coming in for $5,000, you not 75% likely that you'll get it. So maybe the first scenario that you'll run, your best case, you're going to include it. Maybe the moderate you won't, but the worst case you're not going to pick up that grant. So maybe then you'll build this out, and then you can feed your other scenario. So what circumstances will cause the trigger? Well, setting up your financial scenario, you might have trigger points built into your model that show what course your nonprofit's going to take when certain actions happen. For example, if revenue falls 10%, you'll do X. You might maybe pull from the reserves. So if revenue falls by 25%, maybe you'll do X, Y, and Z. So maybe you'll cut expenses for certain programs. So you'll want to build these into your model, and then you're going to definitely monitor them. All right, labor. Probably the biggest part of your decision making in all of this will revolve around labor, payroll taxes, and benefits. It constitutes often at least 70% of the budget. So deciding whether to lay off or furlough workers is difficult, and you need to understand the legal ramifications around those decisions. Employees appreciate transparency when dealing with uncertain times. So some nonprofits are coming up with other ways to reduce labor costs without layoffs by possibly moving to 4-day work weeks or bans on overtime. You want to share the pain and lead by example. We saw one company did a pay reduction to high and mid-range employees and decelerating pay decreases to low salary ranges to protect employees who are the most vulnerable. And you definitely will come out stronger in this if you lead with compassion. So if you did furlough employees, you also need to examine the finances around how you're going to bring employees back. So will this be done in stages? Is everyone going to be coming back at once? Will they be coming back full-time or part-time? Or maybe we'll do a combination of both. So there's really a lot of decisions to be made around labor. And of course, you also have, lots of other expenses such as your rent and utilities and your program fees. Can't forget about those. So let's talk about the types of expenses you're working with. You have your fixed, variable, and semi-variable expenses. Your variable expenses should be zoned in on first because they may be tied to a specific program. These might be reduced if your program is cut. So your fixed expenses should be pretty easy to identify. These may be your rent, the executive director's salary, maybe some borrowing costs, yearly audit, licensing, insurance. And your semi-variable could be tied to maybe other wages or utilities such as fuel or electricity. And also some of your expenses might be changing because you're now delivering your services differently. So besides labor restructuring, what else can you do? Labor is such a big part of your budget. You might, be confused on really what else you can do. So how can I conserve cash? You might hold off on projects or programs that you are planning that are not critical. You can slow some of your vendor payments down, maybe not all of them, but some of them. You may also want to look at using a credit card. So I'm not saying to run up a credit card debt at this time, but this is a way certainly to conserve cash in the short term. And also, can I repurpose a facility I might not be using right now? We're seeing space now being used for frontline services. For example, NYU and Suffolk University announced vacant dorm rooms to be used for scenarios like housing homeless patients and relieving special stressors for hospitals and local emergency response officials. Or our services, they're being, if your services are needed, how do you accommodate the demand? So many organizations are being stretched thin due to the increase in demand. Now, here you need to show donors in the community all the good work you're doing and push for more donations. And also, how do you deal with the financial increase in technology because everyone's now working from home? COVID-19 could actually permanently shift working patterns for some nonprofits as many employees don't want to return to the office. So you'll need to look to donors and grants for investments in infrastructure. There's several levers that you can pull on when scenario planning. For expenses, you need to understand what is really within your control. So what's going to be easier or harder to change? For revenue, you might look at new opportunities that can be pursued. Can your earned income fees be adjusted? Are there funders who can release the funding earlier? For cash and reserves, understand, what circumstances you should access that cash. And for cash flow, look at the timing of it. Also, lastly, as far as your capital expenditures, can you accelerate or delay any facility projects? And these are all potential levers that, you could pull on. Now I'm going to show you an example of maybe a worst case scenario for this nonprofit. So let's just say the nonprofit's shutting its doors for a few months and going dormant, but it's retaining its employees. So don't pay a lot of attention to the actual numbers in this example, but in this case, the nonprofit has a starting balance. It then plots out how much money it expects it to receive in each month without having paid for services available both in April and May. And then at the bottom, it's going to show what reserves it has that can be tapped into and the balance of that. And at the beginning of the next month, it's going to bring all that balance forward, and the process starts all over again. So in the case, this company's, this nonprofit's out of cash by the end of September, and dipping into the reserves. So when you're planning out your own scenarios for best case or worst case, you can set up something like this and, just adjust your revenues and expenses accordingly. So, again, no program fees there for April and May, and no, program supplies there. So they're definitely, they have some reserves that they'll use, and they will tap into that. But in the end, they had a balance of 38,000. They had a beginning balance, I should say, of 38,500 and a reserve of 28,000, which the company used up. It had expenses that far exceeded its revenue because it closed its stores, but it kept its employees on. It also tapped into a $25,000 line of credit. And at the end of September, it had a negative balance of $2,670, which that was covered by the line of credit. So then the line of credit was down to $22,330. That was what was available. So this certainly is a scenario they don't want, but now they're going to understand the impact and how they can fund it. So in all of this, who do I approach? At this time, you really need to step up your game regarding your finances. You want to approach donors. You might want to ask a large donor to consider giving a donation now, even though they usually give it year end. You might want to approach foundations. Can you accelerate a grant or ease up on some of the restrictions of it? Or approach vendors and see if some of those, payment terms can be revised. Also, for rent, maybe approach a landlord, negotiate a lower rate for the short term. Or approach a bank and build on established relationships for funding, maybe asking for that loan. You can also look to your board and, see if we have any designated funds that can be used. Or approach management and see if they can freeze discretionary spending. So these are all things that you could, consider doing. All right, survive or thrive. So right now, you may feel that your nonprofit's financial goals through the next year is really just to keep your head above water. And although that may seem like the end prize, there can be something much grander in scale. I'm hesitant to use the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but actually sometimes it's true. Your organization may have an opportunity to build on a number of relationships to make it stronger in the long run. During the 2008 recession, many nonprofits faced a decrease in funding, but many others experienced flat or an increase in funding. And these nonprofits relied on relationships and confidence. So nonprofits' response, once you develop your scenario plan, you're going to want to communicate that plan. You'll express your financial needs in many different ways. You want to pay attention to your timelines and stick to the plan, but you also need to be flexible. And how will we emerge stronger? So management and board needs to work hand in hand to get through this crisis, really for any crisis. So using financial scenario planning will help your organization understand uncertainty. It creates new sources of hope, and your organization will emerge stronger by using it. And just want to say one thing before we wrap up. I want to switch gears and just talk about some financial controls needed when you're working from home, because so many of you are now working in this environment, which might be different for you. So you still want to maintain strong approval processes for expenses. You want to be timely with your reporting. You really want to check in on the status of projects and not let those be delayed. You want to use good communication, so continue with video chats or phone calls. You also want to embrace the cloud, ensure documents are stored online. So there's nothing is worse than having like time-sensitive work trapped on a desktop computer when you need it. And don't forget about your segregation of duties. So no one should have too much control here. So your processes might have shifted over the last month. So just be sure to make sure they're in check, and not leave your nonprofit vulnerable. And I just want to wrap up with this closing thought. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and the Valley Community Foundation for this opportunity. And really thank you for all the nonprofits servicing our communities. So at this time, I think I'm going to take a few questions here and switch back on. Okay. Anyone have any questions out there? Sharon, back on.
I'm back on, looking for questions, comments, thoughts, ideas that you're doing that have worked well. So, well, some people might be tapping. One of the things that Amy is asking, do you have any ideas on how you can message with staff and keep staff updated in terms of things that are going on?
Message, well, so we certainly use Zoom a lot around here. So that would be one way. Skype, I use a number of different formats, both Zoom and Skype, so you can see the individual if you want to. And
well, John is saying, I'm going to miss your weekly fireside chats. Thanks, John. We're going to miss him too. You've all been so great and we've enjoyed this. Oh, Sarah, Sarah says this was helpful and helped reaffirm that we're going in the right direction. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, that's great.
Yeah. I know so many of you have been doing, a lot of this and just trying to make sure that, you're covering all your bases. So with no more questions, again, I want to thank Val and Jackie from the Valley Community Foundation and the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Jackie, I'm always wanting to make sure I get the 4 in there because I know that's important because of how you position your foundation being for the entire community. Thank you all for everything you're doing. And always, if you have any questions for me or Susan, don't hesitate to get in touch with us at info@danosky.com, and we will be happy to share any of these templates. We'll share any of what you saw for the spreadsheets, and feel free to ask us any questions offline, and we will get back to you. So bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Stay safe, stay well, and hope to speak with you soon. Bye.